Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to join today. I'm really excited about the webinar, how to solve JavaScript issues in SEO. I'm your host today, Chris Steele. I'm a technical SEO at DeepCrawl, and I'm excited to have our host here today, or our presenter here today, Sheikh Bilal Mohammed from BitOasis. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, we're gonna answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So please put your questions in there, and after Sheikh is done with his presentation, we'll get to those questions as many as we can, as much as time allows. Also, there is a small survey at the end of the webinar. It's less than 1 minute to complete. If you could fill that out and complete it, it helps us really curate content for future webinars and presentations. So it would be really great if you would fill that out. And the final thing is that this webinar will be on demand, available on demand later. If you can't stay for the whole webinar, if you want to share the content with someone else, it will be available on the DeepCrawl site probably early next week, both in video format and also a write-up of that. So with that being said, let me just introduce again my presenter for today, Sheikh Mohammed Bilal, head of SEO for BitOasis. Welcome, Sheikh.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. What about yourself?
Thanks a lot. I'm doing really well, and thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for inviting in, for covering up an amazing topic. And yeah, really looking forward for having a great webinar and kind of answer some questions here. Pretty much interesting topic for me to kind of work on. So yeah, I would say you can go with an intro, like for instance, like my name is Sheikh. As you can just give me you already gave like a bit of an introduction. I work at BitOasis right now. I'm leading the SEO department there. SEO has been like a passion for me from past like around 9 years now. Mm-hmm. So I started back in 2011, but officially I would say 2013. So overall, covering up all the areas of content marketing, going a bit more towards like, offsite SEO, some black hat stuff, gray hat stuff, like, yeah. How it starts here.
Absolutely.
So yeah, pretty much like an amazing journey so far. And yeah, like technical SEO per se, like was something of really importance for me in the last couple of years. As you can see, like, like the web is evolving like really crazy nowadays. And you have a lot of stuff coming in and a lot of technologies, and, like the web overall is evolving. And SEOs need to evolve themselves with that, because like, of course, like, new technologies comes with like, new challenges as well. So overall, working with past like 3 years with like different enterprises, different projects, different accounts, we always confronted with like JavaScript, like, although it's really, really great, it's really scalable, but sometimes it can be a nightmare for SEOs per se. So really wanted to kind of speak something around this particular topic, and thanks for the opportunity again. I'm like, yeah, we're really looking forward to kickstart this one. So without further delay, I think we can start. Yeah,
absolutely. Let's go for it.
Perfect. Okay. So all right, so this is going to be our agenda for today. We are going to be covering like 5 top level topics here today. So we'll be talking a bit more about accessibility and indexability, a bit about crawlable internal links, media loading issues. We'll jump in towards page speed and core web vitals. And finally, we'll be discussing a bit more about like JavaScript SEO and the metadata, like, like your SEO tags, titles, description, and so on. Overall, I think so like all of these slides are going to be a bit technical, because like the topic per se is like from a technical SEO perspective, but feel free if you need a bit of a clarification, you can always search for these terms. You will find a good amount of data on the web. But overall, I would say we'll go through as much detail as possible with every particular topic, and let's see where it takes us. So JavaScript SEO, first of all, like a really fascinating question, which I get to hear. Is it really great, or is it going to stay? When I started back in 2017, but like when I confronted back with my first project with JavaScript Framework, I can recall it was Angular, and we had a Node.js backend. And yeah, I was struggling, to be really honest. And like, that was the first thing. And I was like, I was surfing the internet, kind of seeing like, like what is this, like, and just seemingly seeing like the stuff which is being crawled is kind of, you can see empty pages, the crawler cannot see your content. That was something which was really like really new to me. So eventually I kind of starting up like doing some study, doing some experiments, and kind of found out like, okay, this is how it works. So overall, just a bit of a glimpse, JavaScript SEO, JavaScript overall in the web is not going to go away. We as an SEO, like we have to evolve with that. We have to make sure that we keep ourselves up to date, and we learn about these technologies, and we learn about like the tactics which are needed and nowadays to kind of kind of be on top of everything when it comes to JavaScript SEO. In front of your screen, you can actually see like a tweet from John Miller from Google that web has moved from plain HTML. So like before, you used to see like back in 2015, 16, like HTML websites, plain HTML websites, like with minimal CSS and no JavaScript at all, outranking a lot of folks and a lot of websites which are like which are like a bit more of JavaScript heavy, style heavy, and it was simple as that, but like overall now SEOs need to embrace that JavaScript is there, and we have to learn, we have to optimize, and we have to share this knowledge with the development space as well. And I would say like nowadays, like whenever we get confronted with like some really good developers, they actually know like some of the basics of what's needed to actually build an optimized website or an accessible website on a JavaScript stack. So of course it's going to stay and it will be around for a while. So overall, we need to live with it. I know it's a bit of a different scenario for people who actually kind of use WordPress or other CMS platforms to kind of, create static or dynamic content. But overall, like those frameworks are there, but overall, like, from an enterprise level or like, from a lot of websites, like, like people are kind of shifting to these platforms because they are more scalable. And your product is not just kind of there sitting with like where like you have to question about each and every area if you want to just grow there, like you just can't do it because the how the frameworks are being designed, they're super scalable, they're super developer friendly, and as an SEO we want to make sure that we be on top of them. So objectives, so this was like a bit of an idea of like sharing with the audience that like what are the three key areas, like whenever like there's a product or there's an enterprise or there's a company, they have some objectives, yeah. And most of all, like I myself got confronted with these three. So you have like you have to scale up on organic search, you have to lay down a foundation for expansion, and you have to improve the product for scalability in the future as well. And I would say if you do these three check marks, I would say with JavaScript, I think that's a big win at the end of the day. So we'll cover like all the topics that we discussed in the beginning briefly, but we'll just go a bit more deeper into it. So what is JavaScript and how the framework works? So I would say in front of you guys, like we have like two sections, one on the left, one on the right. The left one is gonna be a bit more visual in terms of like how the JavaScript web app is and like how it works. And on the right side, you can actually see a bit of a source code. Like if you actually kind of like, view source from Chrome or any other browser you're using, you'll be able to see that thing, okay? So at the first glimpse, like as an SEO, like you can see like, something is missing or something is pretty much wrong in this code, like you have an HTML tag and you have a head tag and it's closing down and then there's a body tag. You cannot any see like, like the real content inside like the source right now. And it's just like, there are like a lot of ends which are missing from here. So overall, what happens is basically in JavaScript, like you have an application shell, which is kind of like a skeleton for your whole website. So it's like the containers are there, the divs and the other blocks, which are going to have content rendered inside of them. They actually are there. So you have an app shell, and then when the app gets rendered on your browser, now rendering is like when your browser fetches the address and then it kind of processes it and like kind of renders the website, and then it kind of displays the content, and then it kind of looks like any other website over here on the right side you can see. So overall what happens is that when the crawlers are able to access your JavaScript website, they actually usually like overall see a particular like an application shell if you have not done a proper optimization or if you are not followed like some guidelines which have been laid foundation by Google and other search engines at the end of the day. So overall, this is like a quick overview of like how JavaScript app is and how it works. And we want to make sure that, like the crawler sees what a human sees. So like when you open a website, of course, like from a user perspective, they will see something similar to what, like they will see like, okay, like cats are the best, but like overall from a crawler perspective, when they fetch the website, they will not be seeing that. But when they render it, then they will see it. So overall, we have like, for instance, let me say like Google as a leading search crawler, it can fetch and it can render as well. But with the new updates and the new stuff coming our way, you already know that, like Google is being a bit reluctant with indexation, and you gotta really optimize for your crawl budget. You want to make sure that you are not wasting the resources for the crawler to kind of get confronted with like, it has to fetch and then it has to render. So like these are like two requests. So in an ideal scenario, you just give a static content, or you give it like the crawler a rendered copy of the content. But in the worst case scenario, what you're doing is like you are just giving the crawler like, okay, you can fetch their link and then you have to render it. Then you will see the content. So overall, there are two requests. So overall, you can see over here. So first wave of indexing, and then like new links to be crawled. This is like the ideal scenario for a crawler. But what happens with JavaScript, if it's not rendered from the server side, it actually names like client-side rendering. So what happens is that your server sending a response to the browser actually requests a link, and its server responds back to the browser. The browser downloads a JavaScript, as it says JavaScript web app, and then the browser actually kind of executes the script which it gets from the server. And this is the part where it renders and it makes this like this. So like a bit more visual. So like the final product of the website. Okay. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you serve because crawlers are over here. So like they want to make sure that, like during this phase, you can actually see the content itself. Either you cache it or you kind of, show it in a way. Now, I know like some folks of here, like who are going to be joining this webinar probably will disagree that, like client-side rendering is also good enough for us because Google can fetch and render. You have a smaller website. You don't have like a lot of pages. CSR tends to do fine. You just want to make sure that if you are having a bit of an idea of scaling this product or having hundreds and thousands of pages in the future, if you want to do some content automation, if you have an e-commerce website and you want to have like a lot of products introduced in that, you want to make sure that like a website for 5 pages and a website with 100,000 pages, it really makes a difference when you tell the crawlers to kind of fetch and render. That's like 200,000 requests for the crawler. So you really want to save those 100,000 requests for the crawler to optimize the indexation process for the crawler. Okay, so rendering issue, what issues you can face? The crawler first fetches and sees an empty shell. Only Google bot out of all the crawlers. So like Bing bot, any other search engine, like most of them, they are not able to render. So they will just see a blank page. So that's another thing which you have to be concerned about. If you are living in a vicinity where you can see that Bing is a big potential search engine for you, you want to make sure that your website has a server-side rendering. You experience like poor indexability because you are wasting crawl budget at the end of the day. And if you are loading anything after the render, it won't be accessible to the crawlers. So when the browser is kind of processing on the client side, that stuff, the crawler is not going to do, except Google. Google will do it, but the rest of the crawlers, they won't do it. Inside of Google as well, you're actually wasting the crawl budget. So you want to refrain from that. There are two things which we have discussed. So like client-side rendering and server-side rendering. There is another thing which is in between, which lies in between. It's called dynamic rendering. So if, for instance, you are confronted with a situation where we can actually, you don't want to implement server-side rendering, and if you want to keep it simple, then you can actually do dynamic rendering. So what is dynamic rendering? Basically, what you do is for the browser or for the users, they use the website like a client-side render website, like a normal JS app, yeah? But what you do for the crawlers, you introduce a renderer in between. So you have like a lot of renderers. You have to make sure that you choose one depending on your tech stack that you're using. So if you're using React, if you're using Next.js, or if you're using Angular, depending on whatever tech stack you're using, you have to find a compatible renderer, which will sit in between the crawler and your server. And it will render the content just for the specified crawlers for you. So if you specify like, okay, for Bing and for Google, I want to make sure that all of this content is kind of rendered. It will be rendered for those crawlers. So you are also not like, putting an extra load on your server at the end of the day. So I think that was pretty much clear. It's a rare sign. Like I see a lot of people not tending towards dynamic rendering because it can be a bit more complicated and like an expensive implementation to maintain and execute as well. So I would say overall, we do recommend going for SSR website with the server-side rendering. After you have done your server-side rendering or dynamic rendering, what you have to make sure that everything is fine. You can actually run like 3 easy steps. So all of these tools are actually free. So you have like your mobile friendly test. First of all, just go and put your website in Google mobile friendly test and check if your page is mobile friendly and you're not breaking anything. Second thing which you can do is you can actually text your desktop variant with your URL inspection tool, and that can be done inside the Search Console. So you can just try inspecting a URL. And what happens nowadays is actually you have to just kind of make sure that you run a fresh fetch request and see what the crawler sees. And then just see the source code and see like, if their content is visible or not, if your structured data, which you have implemented on the website, is visible or not. So all the things like starting from the HTML tags, like you have title tag, description tags, canonical tags, hreflang tags, your images, your headings, just like try to just kind of, do a control and F and like, just see if that content is actually the part of the source, which crawler is seeing or not. Okay. That would be, I would say, the most easiest test you can actually run to make sure that your app is rendered. Okay. Another issue with the JS apps, if they are not rendered properly, is that the internal links are not crawlable. Now, what I mean with that is like there are 2 ways of doing those. Yeah. So if you can do stuff in the right way and you can do the stuff in a wrong way. So JavaScript use routes. That's pretty much common practice. So like all the JS frameworks, they actually use routes. Routes means slugs. So like, you can actually go from one route to another route. They actually act like a cluster, and each cluster has maybe a lot of URLs. Like overall, these are routes to go to a particular cluster and access a particular page or a particular element, and then load the content inside the app shell, depending on whatever route you selected. Links can be dynamic. Internal links are injected into DOM. So overall, what happens is that in a worst case scenario, if you have a structure like this, which you see in the bottom, where you have a span element and you actually put a JS function that on click, the page will be changing its route to a bad dash link. Now, like I just mentioned bad link because it's not something which is optimal to use. Now, this is the link that, for instance, if you have a website called like domain.xyz/bad-link, this link will not be accessible for the crawlers and it will not be crawled. Okay. While on the same side, if you have a normal href tag for a link, for instance, good link, and you can say on like, this is a link actual, and on click, go to this route. Now, this is a perfect implementation in JS, which you can do, and your link will be crawled by the crawler. If you have just like the on click element in a span or something like that, what's going to happen is that the crawler won't go or won't see it as an extra link inside that page. And you might face an issue where you get confronted with something like this. Now, what is this? So basically, it's from a real life example where we submitted some URLs and we had a JS problem, and we had these dynamic links like the one you see over here and down below. And what happened after we submitted those links to the crawler, they were crawled, but Google excluded them from the index because these are not the links which are kind of, accessible from the pages that are sitting on the top level. So like the home page, if you go from the home page, these pages are there, but a user can access it, but the crawler can't because of the wrong implementation of the internal link. Okay, so next we want to talk a bit more about images, because images are also like a really vital part of any web app in JavaScript. And we just want to make sure that you understand in terms of like how an image interacts and how the crawler sees the image. Basically, the whole point of like whatever I'm discussing is kind of making sure that you guys understand that how Googlebot or any other crawler from a search crawler, like, they see your website and they perceive your website and they crawl your website. Because with JavaScript, you have to ensure that your accessibility and your indexability is not getting hurt or not getting affected in any way. So On the left screen, you can see desktop, a layout which is done in desktop and the same layout in mobile. Yeah. What user does when you open the browser, like you have a laptop or a computer, and you have like a dimension of your screen, like maybe 1024 by 768, and you open a website and you start scrolling down to see the content. Yeah. Same goes with the mobile. Like you open a website and you start swiping down and you start to see the different content inside the page. But crawler doesn't do the scrolling thing. Crawler basically, what it does, it kind of scales the viewport. So viewport is this, like, the screen inside of the layout. So like, the pixels, this is the viewport. Right? In this case, the viewport is 9,307 pixel by 1024 pixel. So what they do is like they elongate the viewport to kind of see the whole content of the website. Yeah. Same goes with mobile, because they are not scrolling the website. They are just changing the dimensions of the viewport to see left to right and top to bottom content, what exists in the page. Now, what happens is that, like lazy loading is something which is really, really common, and really we wanna make sure that, our images, if you have a image heavy website, we lazy load the images. Okay. First of all, make sure that the lazy loading function that you apply is not applied above the fold. I'll probably repeat it in the next slide, but yeah, just to give you a bit of context. First of all, the first screen a user sees, like the above the fold section, which when you open a website, you see a section, it's called above the fold. And if your images are lazy loaded in that section, it's a bad user experience. So you want to make sure that you, first of all, don't lazy load the images which are above the fold. Anything down below, you are actually doing a lazy load technique. Now, there are two codes here for image lazy loading. Yeah. Now, what's the difference between the two? Basically, the first code which you can see is a bad example of lazy loading when it comes to JS app implementation. Okay. Now, what they have done is they have actually added a listener, which is scroll listener. So like when the page starts scrolling, the image appears. Yeah. So like overall, the images or the lazy loading, how it's working is that it's working on a scroll function or a scroll listener at the end of the day. Google is not scrolling the page. Google is scaling the viewport. So what it will see is that anything below your above the fold content, all the images will show like a loading thing, overall, and they will not be able to see the images. So you want to make sure that you add an event listener, maybe like DOM content loaded. So overall, when your DOM has finished loading the content in the browser, it can start to load or lazy load the images down the fold. That way, whenever crawler is accessing your website for crawling purposes, and when they are just resizing the viewport, they will be able to see the images inside the source. So basically, Googlebot won't scroll your page, first thing, and Googlebot does supports lazy loading. It's not like Googlebot is not supporting lazy loading. They do, but you want to make sure that they are not able to scroll the page. They have to resize the viewport. So you want to make sure that your images are loaded, lazy loaded, but not with the scroll identifier, but more of a listener, which can be tied up to like the content loading with the DOM. When it completes, you just show the images. Okay, a small video of what I meant actually. So then we can go for the content here. So if you can see, like, when you're scrolling down, okay, you can see in the DOM, the images are loading as you are scrolling. So it's not causing any bad user experience. From an SEO perspective, you have done an optimization. You are not overwhelming the browser in the first fold to make sure that you are sending a lot of requests. As the user scrolls, the images are loading, but we don't have an event listener for scroll. We have it for DOM. So like whenever everything is loaded in DOM, you just do it. Okay. I want to discuss a bit more about lazy loading, browser lazy loading. So this was coined by Google some time before, and they introduced this function native inside the Chrome stack. So, and if you're using Google Chrome and you put a tag here inside the identifier here inside the image tag, that the loading of the image is lazy, the images will be lazy loaded. Okay. So before it was not supported by a lot of browsers, but now it's being adapted because Google is the trendsetter right nowadays. Like they started with WebP, it got a bit of a hype, and then people were like, okay, we don't like it. But now you can see like it's being made like, like everybody is using WebPs for doing stuff. So same goes with Lazy. They introduced it, but after some time, people like all the other browsers and other platforms, they started adapting it. So overall, Lazy is a native library within the Chrome stack now. You have to, first of all, avoid lazy loading above the fold images. You have to use the lazy load library for unsupported browsers. So for instance, browsers which are not supporting it, for instance, I think so Safari is still testing it out. They have not launched it yet as a native library. So for these browsers, you have to add an exceptional rule to make sure that they use a third-party JS or a library to identify how they lazy load the images overall. And you just have to ensure, first of all, like that your images are scaled properly for the viewport. So like for mobiles, you have images that are scaled properly. So you're not like, you're not causing someone to, if you have a wide image and your mobile screen is not that much of a wide angle, like, when you're scrolling, you are not able to see the detail of the images. So it's a bad user experience, and it's also kind of it's also a waste of resources at the browser and from a speed perspective. Okay, finally, we have JS Web App and Core Web Vitals. Core Web Vitals is a really interesting topic because Google recently announced that they will be using Core Web Vitals as a ranking signal for different websites. Yeah, so people really went. I didn't see like a lot of people went aggressive with Core Web Vitals like 1.5 to 2 years ago, but now people are taking it really, really seriously. Especially with the JavaScript application. What happens? Why it's called JavaScript? That it has a vital or a bigger chunk of a JavaScript or a script which is needed for critical purposes like loading the website and everything like that. Yeah. So you have to ensure that you don't compromise on the speed. And by you using like these simple techniques, you can actually ensure that you are not overdoing your scripts, and you're not just like blocking a lot of time for the crawlers to see the content. So first of all, you can minify the JavaScript. I think everybody will be aware from that, like, what is minification. You can defer non-critical JavaScript. So overall, just load the critical resources for me right now. And, after the critical stuff is loaded, like the container, like everything, and, like this, some stuff is loaded, which was pretty much critical, like, above the fold content, then you can start loading the non-critical JS elements in the page, and you have to inline your critical JS, sorry, for quick ADF loading. Critical JS is referring to the JavaScript, which is really critical for your website to load. So you want to make sure that you use those that script, and you just kind of load it instantly without blocking it, or without just kind of just give it like a topmost priority to just make sure that you are not facing delays over there. You can also, there are two options. So first of all, like either you can inline the JavaScript, which is sometimes not recommended because like the code looks really, really ugly in that way. What people do is like this is also recommended by Google, by the way. So I think Martin Splitt, he also kind of coined this, that if you have a JavaScript heavy website which is using like a lot of scripts, you want to make sure that you distribute the bundles between smaller bundles. So like, let's say your website has a JavaScript of a size of 1 megabyte. Now, 1 megabyte is a really big payload, and it might have functions which are critical and non-critical at the end of the day. So you want to make sure that if your critical JS is like maybe 200 kilobytes, you make a bundle for 200 kilobytes. You have left 800 now. And then you decide that 800, okay, still it's big. So let's make chunks of like, let's say 400 and 400 kilobytes. So you overall don't overdo like overwhelm the browser in terms of like giving it like one JavaScript of 1 megabyte, but it actually gives you like, it gives like 3 small chunks. What it does is like the first one is critical one. So once it's loaded or it's rendered, your critical JS renders, your website starts loading up, and the user can actually see something in front of them. Yeah. And then you can do the rest of the bundles either with the differ or as you seem fit in terms of like how your layout is designed in a way. If you're using tracking or any third-party tools, like people use like a lot of A/B testing tools. I hate A/B testing tools, not like not hate it, but like, just because they are a performance killer. I do like the A/B testing tool just to make sure that, because they give you really valuable data to ensure that, what's going on, how your visitors are perceiving the layout and your website itself. So pretty much good for learning, but, like you have to make a trade there. Yeah. So I'm not saying not use it for sure, but just make sure that if those scripts can be lazy loaded, or they can be placed in the footer rather than the header to ensure, because there's no critical element you want to just A/B test instantly. So it can wait. Yeah, it can wait till the website loads or it renders. So you can always lazy load that particular script at the end of the day.
Sheikh, I wanted to jump in right here on this one real quick, if you don't mind, and just kind of get a little more perspective on that, because a lot of people are using third-party tools that are running JavaScript. So give me a little more on your best practices. Like, is it always put that JavaScript in the footer?
Well, yeah, it depends, to be really honest, Chris. So like how I want to do it, or how I like to do it, is like we don't affect 100% of our users with a particular A/B test. We usually pick a bit of a chunk. So if you're getting like 100K of traffic on a monthly basis, I would rather pick like 10,000 or 5,000 as a test case to get my initial learnings, rather than just slowing the experience down for the whole users. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That kind of helps in terms of like, you can understand the data, you can understand what the users are doing, and you are also not slowing down the experience for all the users at the end of the day. From a tracking or from the third-party tools for A/B testing perspective, like, like there are tools there, like, which are pretty much I can recommend. Like, there are good tools which will not render to kind of, make your website really, really slow. And then there are tools that can make your website slow. Although, like, I love Optimizely from Google. It's really nice. We usually implement it through GTM. You can also implement it either ways, but I like using GTM for that purpose. And you can literally kind of, it caters up to all of your needs for A/B testing at the end of the day. And it's a really balanced tool for not slowing down your web experience a lot. So you really have to be keenful whenever you are choosing an A/B testing software, for sure. So if you already have a JavaScript heavy website and you are running a third-party scripts, and you are running maybe like 3 or 4 A/B tests. I have been to that situation where, like, if I can recall a company I was working with, and they had like 4 different scripts for A/B testing. There was like one for funnel, and there was, although like that script is not was on the static pages, because it was also measuring like how many people are entering into the funnel. And then on top of that, we were having different components for different project managers or product managers. Like, there was logistics involved, and there was operations, and then there was deliveries, and all of them had their A/B test running inside this page. And like, we were really slowing down the experience for the users. And I think so, like, like that was the biggest performance killer for us at that time. So what we did, we kind of split it up, the use cases, with smaller chunks, to like make sure that we are not affecting all of our traffic with those A/B tests, and just split down to smaller chunks to ensure that you get your learnings, and you just do the optimizations that way, and you also don't like slow down the experience for all of the users which are going to your website. And finally, I would say, just make sure that you guys are really, really updated with web.dev. Web.dev is from Google itself. So I know like a lot of you guys might be following Google Webmaster Blog for new updates and stuff regarding page speed, open page, or offsite, or even their core algorithm updates and stuff like that. But I would really recommend you guys to be acquainted with web.dev, and even like just kind of see their website. It's really, really amazing. So whatever new is coming, whatever new technologies are coming, they really nail it down when it comes to implementation, and how they implement it and how they code it. I always keep them as an example in front of me whenever I'm dealing with a particular scenario, to ensure that like these are really high standards I really want to adapt to. So overall, I would really recommend you guys to kind of get it acquainted with this website, and like see, because they have like a lot of information. They are updating on a regular basis for all the SEOs out there, to make sure that they learn, and they kind of also evolve with how the technologies and how the web is evolving overall at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that was pretty much it for today's webinar. Chris, I think if you want to discuss something in between or something, or if we can take some questions here, yeah.
Absolutely. We've already got some questions coming in. So I'm just gonna, it looks like we have questions both in the chat and in the Q&A box. I'm just gonna jump back and forth and just put a few questions out there for you to answer, Sheikh.
Okay.
All right, you ready?
I can see something on my screen and the questions. Yeah, like we have Jenny Woods, I think, and we have one more from Nabil. Okay, yeah. So
yeah, for sure. I like this one. Let's go with this one. I'll put it out there to you. How do services like prerender.io work with this? And is there essentially is this essentially server-side rendering?
Yeah, so pre-render is like when I talked about dynamic rendering shortly in between. So I talked about a renderer. So basically, you have a website which is a JavaScript web app, and it's not server-side rendered. And then you have the browser and the crawler. Yeah. So you want to make sure that the crawler sees the static content, or it sees your content exactly with one request. Yeah. So what you do is you introduce a pre-render or a renderer in between. Now pre-render, and also like there are a bunch of other tools as well available, which make the rendering part easier for the web stacks. So I would totally recommend you guys to use any particular service, because their core service means that they will be rendering your website. Yeah, it's no rocket science. They will just fetch your website, render it for the crawler, and then they serve it to the crawler, and then they can see all the content, you know, at the end of the day. So overall, make sure that just make sure that, you know, prerender.io supports whatever web stack you're using Next.js or React or whatsoever. Just make sure that it pretty much aligns with that, and you have a definite support available for these guys to make sure that your development team, or if you are a developer yourself, you can implement it with ease, and you also have a future support for the implementations.
Awesome. Great answer. I'm just going to go to the chat real quick and grab one of the questions. David Garcia wants to know, what about testing in dev environments?
It's good, actually. So most of the time, I don't like using a page speed tool or web.dev to kind of analyze my website for core web vitals or anything else. During the development perspective as well, like whenever we are testing the environment or testing the websites, we usually make sure that, you know, we kind of test it in the native Chrome browser. And I think it's better because, for instance, just to give you a quick example here, we are implementing or we are optimizing for core web vitals. Okay, I really just kind of, you know, I'm really amazed at people when they are saying like, okay, we want to score 100 out of 100 in the page speed. Like, I don't understand that. You know, you don't have to aim for 100. You want to make sure that whatever audience you're serving, they are getting the best experience possible, because at the end of the day, you are not optimizing it for the crawler, but rather for the users. Yeah. So you can just like use your Chrome to kind of have a bit of a test run and see how the website performs on mobile and desktop with the internet connection on that particular, let's say, locality. For instance, my audience is from UAE per se. I would use Wi-Fi from my home. I'm actually located in UAE. Yeah. And I will keep that data touch point to kind of ensure that, you know, like how my audience or how my users will perceive this website when they open it up, for instance. There can be worst case scenarios when, you know, like people are using slower connections, but yeah, like you have to make sure that you go with the majority of data. Although Google tends to go with the worst case scenario and kind of rates your website. So just don't be heartbroken when you see some red stuff or bloody stuff inside the core web vitals, or if you're going to web.dev or page speed, just make sure that whatever audience you are serving, they are getting the best experience possible at the end of the day. And I think Chrome itself is a really good stack to test for developers and as for SEOs as well. I was using all of these third-party tools before. I was using GTmetrix. I was using, I would say, I think a lot of those tools. I cannot even recall them because I have not used them for like a lot of time now. So one-stop shop for me is actually Chrome DevTools to just test everything out.
Awesome, I agree. That's the best way to test in my experience as well. There's one I wanted to get to really quick specifically. Nabil is asking, how do we handle JavaScript and Shopify and lazy loading in Shopify? I know it's a very popular e-commerce platform, so I'm sure some people have some questions about that.
Well, to be really honest, like I have done like maybe 2 or 3 Shopify websites back in the days. I'm not pretty much sure like what kind of architecture they are working on currently. But when you're using a platform like Shopify, you have to make sure that, you know, like this is a subscription platform, and when you buy a subscription, they serve the whole thing from their servers. So like, particularly say like, you know, a lot of things are already optimal, at the end of the day, because they have some great engineers working with their team. But what you have to do is like, again, from a perspective of if you are having any add-on scripts, like, a third-party tool which needs you to add a script in the header or the footer, just ask yourself that for the execution of the script, is it really necessary for me to kind of put it in the header tag, or probably just block other stuff? Because header tag loads before the body tag. So basically what you're doing, you are actually making a trade that the user will see the content a bit after your JavaScript loads. Yeah. So you have to make sure that you ask yourself a question. To be really honest, like that's what I do. Like whenever I'm adding any JavaScript code in my website, I would ask myself, is it important, or is it really worth it to add this JavaScript and kind of block the content that a user really needs to see right now, and do it? If you are okay with that, do it. Otherwise, just defer it, or like you have a lot of techniques to just kind of just make sure that you don't put it in the header if it's not really of an importance. And if you are using a particular script or a particular provider where the script doesn't work except inside the header tag, then you are left with no option. So I think that pretty much clears the question. So overall, Shopify is a really good platform. You really don't need to worry about much, but just make sure that you don't overdo with the third-party scripts in a way where you are killing the user experience.
Great answer. I think we've got time for a few more questions, so I'm gonna jump into a few more of these. Here's a quick one, another one from Jenny. She says, Jack, tracking scripts in the footer, does that apply to GA.js code too, or not so much?
Are you referring to Google Analytics?
Yes.
So I would say GA is JavaScript. Like, yeah, okay. I did it. Like, I did run like a lot of use cases for this one as well. Now, back in the day in 2019, when I was running a blog of myself, I was actually running a blog, and I was just asking myself, like, how can I just speed up the experience? And I just wanted, that time I was actually using like a third-party tool like PageSpeed, and I'm like, okay, I want to score 100 out of 100, and like I want to do everything in a really optimal way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I even like I even did one thing which was pretty much funny, that I literally kind of fetched out the code from the JS and just put it as an inline code in the footer or the header, just to make sure that how I can actually kind of like make this optimal, or like increase the speed at all. See, like small tracking functions like JS from Google Analytics, I don't think so it will hurt you that much, okay? But it's up to you if you want to put it in the footer or you want to put it in the header. I think both ways it will not, I would say, hinder the performance that much at the end of the day. So my common practice whenever I'm using Google Analytics is I go with the footer technique, because it tends to work really well for me. But it's just like I'm used to it from like quite some time. So I just like put the code in the footer. Like I just put the script in the footer, just to make sure that like I'm not just blocking it or something like that. But overall, GA script has also been some time if I've used it since, because we are using Google Tag Manager now. So I think Tag Manager goes really well with stuff. So I think the way it's being done is like you have one script, and it kind of has all your scripts under one umbrella. And when your website is loaded, it actually loads everything in the DOM, making sure that your experience is not getting slower at the end of the day. But yeah, like it's up to you guys. Like it depends on like a particular scenario or a particular website, where I can make a call that I want to put it in the header, either want to go with the GTM technique, because if you have a smaller website and you're not running a lot of test cases, it's not worth it to have a GTM there just for GA. But if you have a lot of scripts, then it makes sense. So overall, I would say go with the footer. It works.
Awesome. We've got time for one more question. So I'm going to throw one more out there to you, Sheikh, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah.
Ashley wants to know, have you ever done any SEO A/B testing on a CDN? Any negative impacts?
Can you rephrase the question, please?
Have you ever done any SEO A/B testing on a CDN? And is there any negative impacts?
SEO on a CDN. So I would say, first of all, it doesn't make sense to have, first of all, like CDN is like a distribution network you're using to speed up the experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure, first of all, that all of your URLs in the CDN have a canonical tag to your main domain. Okay. You don't want your CDN URL to get indexed at the first place, because that's going to be 100% duplication of your website content. So if you have a CDN URL or all of your website, which is kind of, because CDN is a mirror of your website, yeah. And it's just like a faster server and a delivery network, and with making sure that there's a lesser latency with a user experiences if they are opening the website anywhere in the globe, yeah. So you want to make sure that first of all that you have a canonical tag going towards your main website. So if you have a website like domain.abc or XYZ, and you have a CDN like cdn-domain.abc, so like you want to make sure that the CDN URL, every URL in CDN has a canonical tag to a respective URL for that particular slug in your main domain itself. You don't want to let's say, you don't want to get them indexed anyways. So just make sure that you refrain from it. I haven't done it, to be really honest, just to like have fun, but I would not do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense to kind of have a CDN URL indexed in the search at the end of the day. So I would rather just have a proper canonical structure to ensure that I don't duplicate my domain in any way, and I have like a concrete content coming from one side from my own domain itself.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Sheikh. Well, that's all that we have time for today. I want to thank everybody for attending, and just a reminder that this will be available on demand on the DeepCrawl website. Thank you all for attending. You guys have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.